Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies and Isabella II of Spain. Let us begin with the first, Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies. Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies was born on the 27th of April in the year 1806 in Palermo, in the Kingdom of Sicily. What shaped the destiny of this princess born in a time of dynastic pride and political uncertainty? How did she rise from a Bourbon child of Sicily, the most influential woman in Spain's 19th century monarchy? What secrets and sacrifices marked her journey from palace daughter to queen, regent, and power broker? Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Maria Christina was the daughter of King Francis I of the Two Sicilies and Maria Isabella of Spain. Her early years were steeped in royal tradition and shaped by the power dynamics of Southern Europe's ruling houses. As a member of the Bourbon Two Sicilies dynasty, her future was not her own. It was designed by politics, alliances, and royal duty. Groomed for a match that would serve her family's interests, Maria Christina grew up knowing that love was never a factor in royal marriage. Loyalty, heritage, and influence were everything. Her education prepared her to represent a kingdom, but it was her resilience and calm intelligence that would soon define her future in ways no tutor could have imagined. In the spring of 1829, the Spanish throne faced a deepening crisis. King Ferdinand VII, aging and ailing, had no male heir, and his latest wife, Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, had recently died. The kingdom teetered on the edge of a dangerous succession dispute. The court was divided, with powerful factions pushing rival candidates, and at the center of this uncertainty, a strategic marriage was proposed to restore balance. That bride was Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies. Recommended by her sister-in-law Luisa Carlotta, Maria Christina was brought to Ferdinand's attention for both her bloodline and her potential fertility. She was his niece, a Bourbon princess with solid dynastic credentials. Though she was just 23 and he nearly twice her age, the match was approved quickly. They were married on the 12th of December in the year 1829 at the Basilica of Nuestra Senora de Atocha in Madrid. This union was not built on affection. It was a political calculation, a final effort to secure a direct heir and fend off the claims of Ferdinand's brother, Don Carlos. For Maria Christina, the wedding marked the beginning of a role that would demand far more than grace and obedience. She was not just a queen consort. She would soon become the mother of a sovereign, a regent, and a defender of the monarchy itself. Even as her veil settled on the wedding day, the storm clouds of inheritance, intrigue, and war were already gathering around her. As queen consort, Maria Christina entered a Spanish court already torn by decades of instability. The Napoleonic Wars had shattered confidence in the crown, and Ferdinand VII's reign was marked by alternating waves of repression and reform. Into this fragile environment stepped a young queen, tasked not only with bearing an heir, but also with navigating treacherous political waters. From the outset, Maria Christina found herself caught between two hostile camps: the liberals, who hoped for reform and a constitutional monarchy, and the Carlists, ultra-conservatives loyal to Don Carlos, Ferdinand's brother. Though she tried to remain neutral, her mere presence signaled a new phase in Spanish politics. The blue cloak she wore upon her arrival in Madrid became a symbol of hope to the liberals, a queen who might protect the legacy of modern governance. Behind palace doors, Ferdinand's health continued to decline, and anxiety grew over the royal succession. Maria Christina's every move was scrutinized. Her growing influence over the king made her a target for criticism, even as she carefully built alliances and earned public affection. When she gave birth to her first daughter, Isabella, on the 10th of October in the year 1830, her role shifted again. She was now the mother of a potential monarch in a kingdom where female succession remained hotly contested. While Ferdinand struggled with illness and political fatigue, Maria Christina's resolve hardened. She was not simply an ornament to the crown, she was becoming its spine. The birth of Princess Isabella in 1830 should have marked a triumph for Queen Maria Christina, but instead it triggered a storm of resistance. The Spanish crown had long followed Salic law, which barred women from inheriting the throne. Ferdinand VII, determined to pass the crown to his daughter, sought to undo this restriction by invoking an older law, the Pragmatic Sanction of 1789, previously issued by his father, Charles IV, but never formally enacted. In March of 1830, Ferdinand declared the Pragmatic Sanction publicly, making his infant daughter the heir presumptive. Maria Christina, fully aware of the consequences, stood firmly by his decision, but the move infuriated the Carlists. Don Carlos and his supporters considered the act illegitimate, and tensions escalated toward open confrontation. Behind closed doors, Maria Christina navigated growing threats with cautious bravery. She knew the stakes, not just her daughter's crown, but her own future. In the summer of 1832, while traveling to La Granja with the royal family, Ferdinand suffered a serious accident followed by a dangerous illness. Fearing his death, Maria Christina turned to conservative courtiers for advice and reluctantly signed a decree that named Don Carlos as her chief advisor should she become regent. But Carlos refused, suspicious of her intentions. Soon after, Luisa Carlotta arrived and swiftly persuaded the king to reaffirm the Pragmatic Sanction. The law was reissued, and Don Carlos's hopes were momentarily dashed. In this turbulent episode, Maria Christina proved that she was willing to risk everything, even compromise, to protect her daughter's future and the fragile legitimacy of the crown. The summer of 1832 brought Queen Maria Christina face to face with the darkest corridors of palace politics. As King Ferdinand's health worsened at the royal palace of La Granja, rival factions circled like vultures. Amid whispered rumors and closed-door meetings, Maria Christina found herself isolated, with only a fragile claim to the regency and a newborn daughter whose inheritance was under siege. Desperate for support, Maria Christina turned to Francisco Calamard, a staunch Carlist and former minister, who urged her to accept that the people would rally behind Don Carlos. Pressured and vulnerable, she reluctantly signed a decree naming herself as regent with Carlos as her principal advisor, a concession made in fear, not in trust. It was a political misstep that nearly cost her everything. When Ferdinand was believed to be on the brink of death, conservative elements used the moment to declare the Pragmatic Sanction repealed. Maria Christina was deserted by many in court, her authority crumbling. But then came a dramatic turn. The king recovered. Within days, Luisa Carlotta raced to La Granja and intervened. She persuaded Ferdinand to reinstate the Pragmatic Sanction and to dismiss Calamard. The reversal was swift and stunning. This episode at La Granja was more than court drama. It revealed the Queen's fragile standing and the ruthless nature of 19th-century Spanish politics. But it also marked Maria Christina's transformation from passive consort to active power broker, learning to wield influence in a kingdom that barely tolerated women in command. On the 29th of September in the year 1833, King Ferdinand VII died, leaving behind a kingdom divided and a daughter not yet 3 years old. As Isabella was proclaimed queen, Maria Christina stepped forward as regent, the first woman to lead Spain in nearly a century. But her authority was contested from the very first moment. The Carlists, rejecting Isabella's right to rule, declared Don Carlos the legitimate monarch. Across Spain, conservative strongholds rallied to his cause, and whispers of rebellion turned into open war. The First Carlist War had begun, and Maria Christina found herself at the head of a kingdom at war, with only fragile alliances to support her. Her regency was more than ceremonial. Maria Christina was now the single most powerful figure in Spain, responsible for defending her daughter's throne, managing an unstable government, and holding together a fractured nation. Though conservative by upbringing, she leaned on the support of the moderate liberals, whose military strength and political influence proved crucial in resisting the Carlists. Every day as regent tested her composure, her resolve, and her ability to compromise. She governed with both caution and courage, knowing that one misstep could end not only her regency, but her daughter's future. In the eyes of the public, she was no longer just a widow or a mother. She had become a sovereign figure in her own right. It was a role she had never expected, yet one she would hold with remarkable endurance in the face of relentless political storm. The First Carlist War, which erupted in 1833, placed Queen Regent Maria Christina at the heart of a brutal civil conflict. The Carlists, fiercely loyal to Don Carlos, viewed Isabella's ascension as illegal, a violation of divine and dynastic law. Their cause was deeply rooted in traditionalist values, absolute monarchy, and Catholic orthodoxy. Maria Christina, in contrast, now stood as the unlikely defender of constitutional monarchy and moderate reform. She aligned herself with the Isabelinos, a coalition of loyalists and liberals who backed Isabella's right to rule. It was a pragmatic alliance. Maria Christina herself was no radical, but she understood that without liberal support, the regency would collapse. The military forces she depended on came from this faction, and their generals became vital to the crown's survival. The war was fierce and unforgiving. Carlist uprisings erupted across northern Spain, especially in the Basque Country and Catalonia. Entire villages were torn between rival allegiances. Maria Christina's government struggled to maintain control, relying heavily on both diplomacy and force. She issued royal decrees, appointed ministers, and sought external support, all while raising young Isabella in the midst of turmoil. For Maria Christina, this was more than a political battle. It was a fight for her daughter's future, her own legitimacy, and the vision of a Spain that could evolve beyond bloodline alone. Her leadership was constantly tested by shifting loyalties and mounting public pressure. Yet even as war dragged on, the regent held her position, determined to outlast her enemies and preserve the throne for the child she fiercely protected. While Queen Regent Maria Christina battled political upheaval and civil war, another secret was quietly unfolding within the walls of the royal palace, a romance that defied tradition, status, and royal expectation. In late 1833, barely 3 months after Ferdinand VII's death, Maria Christina secretly married Agustin Fernando Muñoz, a former royal guard of humble birth. The relationship had begun discreetly, perhaps even before Ferdinand's passing. Some accounts claim Muñoz saved Maria Christina's life during a carriage accident. Others whisper of a quiet, impulsive affection formed in the shadows of court life. Whatever the truth, their bond was undeniable and dangerously controversial. As regent, Maria Christina risked everything by marrying beneath her rank. Publicly acknowledging the union would have meant immediate loss of her regency. so she kept it secret. Their marriage remained hidden from the court and the people, even as they began raising a family together. Over time, they would have several children, each born into a delicate balance between royalty and scandal. Within palace walls, rumors flourished. Munoz became a figure of both mockery and resentment, nicknamed the Queen's fancy man by soldiers and courtiers alike. The burden of secrecy weighed heavily. Maria Christina was caught between public duty and private devotion. Her love for Munoz was genuine, but her role as regent demanded restraint. For years, she walked this impossible line, upholding the crown in daylight while sheltering a forbidden marriage in the shadows. And as the political tides began to shift once again, that secret would soon come at a cost she could no longer control. By the summer of 1836, the delicate balance Maria Christina had maintained between crown and compromise began to fracture. The liberals, once her greatest allies, were growing restless. They believed the regent was stalling true reform, favoring conservative courtiers, and shielding her secret marriage from scrutiny. Meanwhile, soldiers whispered about Munoz, calling him guapo, a mocking nod to the Queen's unofficial consort. The tension exploded at the royal palace of La Granja, where soldiers stationed at the summer residence staged a mutiny. Furious with the regent's reluctance to endorse a constitution, they issued a bold demand: reinstate the liberal constitution of 1812, or face the consequences. Panic surged through the palace. According to widespread rumor, the mutineers went as far as to threaten Munoz's life, using him as leverage to force the Queen's compliance. Whether or not this was true, Maria Christina capitulated. In a moment of fear and political clarity, she signed the decree. The constitution was restored, and with it, the liberals reasserted their influence. But the cost to Maria Christina's image was irreversible. She appeared weak to her enemies and compromised to her allies. The secret of her marriage, once whispered, was now an open scandal. Her grasp on the regency was slipping, not just due to opposition, but because the very coalition that had upheld her now doubted her intentions. The Queen Regent's once powerful presence was now a fading force within a court she no longer fully controlled. By the year 1840, Maria Christina's regency had become unsustainable. The whispers had turned into demands, the court's discontent into open opposition. Her secret marriage to Munoz, now widely known, had permanently damaged her reputation. Liberals who once upheld her authority now accused her of betraying reformist ideals, while conservatives had long considered her a traitor to tradition. The final blow came from the military. Disillusioned and politically emboldened, Spain's army no longer backed the regent. They rallied behind General Baldomero Espartero, a liberal war hero whose popularity surged as Maria Christina's faded. With little choice left, and facing mounting pressure from the courts, Maria Christina announced her resignation as regent in October of 1840. It was a moment of quiet defeat. Without ceremony or farewell, she left Spain and departed for France with Munoz and their children. After years of commanding courtrooms and influencing kings, she now became a private citizen in exile, a queen without a throne. Her departure marked the end of an era, the last woman to rule Spain until her own daughter would come of age. In exile, Maria Christina found safety, but also distance. The country she had governed was now led by the very general who had helped push her out. Spain moved forward under Espartero's regency, while Maria Christina retreated into the background of European nobility. Uncertain if she would ever return to the land she once ruled with steely resolve and guarded affection. After her abdication, Maria Christina settled into a quiet, privileged exile in France. In 1842, she purchased the Château de Malmaison, once the home of Empress Josephine, and turned it into her personal sanctuary. Far from the turmoil of Spanish politics, she focused on family life with Muñoz and their growing children. The years in France offered her privacy, dignity, and a chance to regroup away from judgment and scandal. But Spain was not finished with her. In 1843, General Espartero's regency collapsed under political unrest. Sensing opportunity, Maria Cristina returned to Madrid with her family. The political landscape had shifted, and her daughter, Queen Isabella II, was formally declared of age in 1844, a milestone that effectively closed the chapter of regency for good. Maria Cristina's return was not triumphant, but it was accepted. Her presence at court became ceremonial, her influence muted. Yet, in recognition of loyalty and family bonds, Isabella honored her mother's past sacrifices. In June of 1844, she publicly legitimized Maria Cristina's marriage to Muñoz. Their wedding was formally celebrated, and Muñoz was granted the noble title of Duke of Rienceres, along with the prestigious rank of Captain General. Though her political power had vanished, Maria Cristina resumed a quieter form of royalty, a matriarch watching her daughter reign. Her comeback was not about ruling again. It was about restoration of dignity, reconciliation, and preserving the honor of her unconventional life. In the aftermath of her return to Spain, Maria Cristina took one of the boldest steps of her personal life. She brought her once secret marriage into the public light. On the 12th of October in the year 1844, she and Agustin Fernando Muñoz were officially wed in a public ceremony with the full approval of her daughter, Queen Isabella II. What had long been an open secret was now formalized within the bounds of royal protocol. Isabella's gesture was more than a family kindness. It was a political act of forgiveness, a sign that the monarchy was moving forward. Muñoz, once a mere guardsman ridiculed by nobles, was granted the title Duke of Rienceres and elevated to the rank of Captain General, the highest military honor in Spain. He was later given additional titles, including Marquis of San Agustin, and even honored abroad by Louis Philippe of France with the title Duke of Montmorat and the Grand Cross of the Légion d'Honneur. Maria Cristina, now the Duchess of Rienceres, re-entered Spanish high society on her own terms. Though she no longer held political power, she was once again treated with ceremonial respect. Her children with Muñoz were acknowledged and included within aristocratic circles, giving legitimacy to a family once hidden from view. Through this public affirmation, Maria Cristina reclaimed a dignity that had long been complicated by secrecy. Her personal happiness was no longer a scandal. It was, finally, part of the royal story. In the years following her public marriage, Maria Cristina lived a life marked by privilege, grace, and quiet withdrawal from Spain's daily politics. Though she no longer held formal power, the former Queen Regent remained a respected figure within European nobility. Honors and titles continued to flow, not just from her daughter Isabella, but also from foreign monarchs who recognized her role in stabilizing Spain during turbulent times. Agustin Muñoz, her devoted husband, was granted further titles and responsibilities. In 1846, Isabella named him a Knight of the Golden Fleece, one of the most prestigious honors in Spain. Later that same year, she also bestowed upon him the title Marquis of San Agustin. These gestures were not merely ceremonial. They symbolized a full restoration of dignity for both Maria Cristina and the man she had once loved in secret. By the early 1850s, however, the political winds were shifting once more. The rise of new factions, scandals within Isabella's own reign, and growing unrest throughout Europe led Maria Cristina to quietly step back from public life. In 1854, she left Spain again for France, this time without drama or disgrace, only a gentle farewell. From her residence in France, she remained in occasional contact with the Spanish court, offering support but never interference. She had weathered revolutions, civil wars, and personal upheaval. Now she chose peace. Her final years were lived with simplicity and familial devotion, far from the courts that had once feared and revered her in equal measure. In the final decades of her life, Maria Christina remained in France, far from the palace intrigues and civil wars that had once defined her reign. Her days at the Château de Malmaison were marked by reflection, quiet gatherings, and the rhythms of family life. Surrounded by her children and grandchildren, she found a kind of peace that had long eluded her during her turbulent years on the Spanish throne. Yet, even in retreat, sorrow visited her often. In 1873, her beloved husband, Agustin Muñoz, passed away. His death marked the end of a union that had defied royal norms and shaped much of her private world. Widowed for the second time, Maria Christina mourned in silence, leaning on her children for comfort and companionship. Her health began to decline in the years that followed. She suffered from recurring respiratory ailments, bouts of coughing, faintness, and fever that slowly stole her strength. But she remained mentally alert, often reminiscing about her youth in Sicily, her early days in Spain, and the battles she had once fought for her daughter's crown. Though she lived far from Madrid, her name was still spoken with reverence and debate. Some remembered her as a stabilizing force during a fragile regency. Others viewed her through the lens of scandal and secrecy. But in her solitude, Maria Christina seemed unconcerned with legacy. Her thoughts turned to faith, family, and the fragile paths of destiny, the very forces that had shaped the arc of her long and complicated life. By the late 1870s, Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies had outlived 2 kings, 2 marriages, a civil war, and her own regency. Her life, once marked by court intrigue and political survival, had softened into quiet days in the French seaside town of Le Havre. But her health continued to decline, the toll of age and past hardships growing heavier with each passing season. On the 22nd of August in the year 1878, Maria Christina passed away at the age of 72. She died peacefully, surrounded by family, in a country that had offered her sanctuary and distance from the tumult of her former life. News of her death spread quickly, and while the reactions were mixed, some solemn, some indifferent, her place in Spanish history was undeniable. In accordance with royal tradition and her status as the mother of Queen Isabella II, Maria Christina's body was returned to Spain for burial. She was laid to rest at El Escorial, the royal mausoleum outside Madrid, where generations of monarchs and consorts lay entombed. The final procession was quiet but dignified, a symbolic closing of one of the most complex chapters in 19th-century Spanish monarchy. Her legacy remains layered and contested. Was she a power-hungry manipulator or a pragmatic regent holding a crumbling kingdom together? A scandalous queen or a devoted mother protecting her child's birthright? Perhaps she was all of these. What is certain is that Maria Christina's regency helped shape modern Spain, not with glory or grandeur, but with resilience, sacrifice, and an unyielding will to endure. She ruled not by choice, but by necessity, and in doing so, she carved a place in history that no crown alone could guarantee. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Isabella of Spain was born on the 10th of October in the year 1830 at the Royal Palace of Madrid in the Kingdom of Spain. How does a child barely out of the nursery become the symbolic center of a nation's struggle? What happens when a throne is inherited not through strength or preparation, but by accident of birth and the vacuum of power. From princess to queen before adolescence, Isabella's journey defied expectations and sparked controversy for generations. Isabella's early life unfolded in the shadow of her father, King Ferdinand VII, a monarch desperate for a male heir. But when his efforts failed and no son arrived, young Isabella's position changed dramatically. In a bold and contested move, Ferdinand issued the Pragmatic Sanction of 1830, a decree that overturned traditional Salic law and allowed his eldest daughter to succeed him. The decision sent shockwaves through Spanish nobility. Conservative factions, long supporters of male succession, quickly rallied behind Ferdinand's brother, Carlos. Thus, before Isabella could even walk steadily through the palace halls, she became a figure of national division, the girl at the center of what would soon become a dynastic war. Her early upbringing reflected these tensions. Kept close under the watchful eye of her mother, Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies, Isabella was carefully instructed in Catholic piety, royal etiquette, and the heavy responsibilities she would one day bear. The weight of a kingdom pressed onto a child's shoulders, setting the stage for one of Spain's most tumultuous royal reigns. Isabella was not yet 3 years old when fate swept her into the storm of succession. On the 29th of September in the year 1833, King Ferdinand VII died. With his passing, the fragile monarchy was handed to a toddler, a queen in name but a child in every other sense. Spain, already fractured by ideological tensions, now faced a future led by a baby sovereign. To shield the throne from immediate collapse, Isabella's mother, Maria Christina, assumed the regency. Her authority, however, was fiercely contested. The late king's brother, Don Carlos, openly defied the Pragmatic Sanction and declared himself the rightful monarch. This triggered the First Carlist War, a brutal civil conflict that would rage for years across the Spanish countryside. Meanwhile, Isabella's life was one of guarded innocence. Raised behind the thick walls of royal palaces, she was surrounded by tutors, nurses, and courtiers who served both as caretakers and as political agents. Her days were filled with lessons in religion, monarchy, and tradition, but the sound of distant battles and political strife always loomed in the background. The contrast between her sheltered education and the violent realities outside the palace sharpened with each passing year. The young queen was being molded not just as a figurehead, but as a beacon of legitimacy for the constitutional cause. Every step she took in her infancy was watched, interpreted, and politicized. Even as a child, Isabella had already become the battleground for a divided nation's hopes and fears. On the 10th of October in the year 1843, Isabella was formally declared of age, barely 13 years old, and crowned Queen of Spain in her own right. The regency of her mother, Maria Christina, officially ended. What followed was not a moment of clarity, but a storm of uncertainty. A child had become the sovereign of a fractured nation, her name bearing the full weight of civil conflict, political unrest, and competing visions of Spain's future. The declaration came amid continued instability. Though the First Carlist War had subsided, tensions simmered across the country. The fragile alliance between liberals and moderates that had upheld Isabella's claim began to splinter. Political leaders vied for control over the young queen's court, each seeking to shape her opinions, alliances, and decisions. In truth, power rested more with ministers than with Isabella herself. Yet every move she made was judged as if she were an experienced monarch. For Isabella, this sudden elevation to adulthood and sovereignty was bewildering. Her education, though thorough in tradition and religion, had not prepared her for the cunning of court politics or the ruthlessness of Spain's shifting factions. Her court was a whirlwind of advisors, generals, and noble families, many of whom saw her as a tool rather than a queen. In public ceremonies, she wore the crown and carried the scepter. In private, she was still a child struggling to understand a world that demanded decisiveness, loyalty, and strength. Her reign had begun, but it would be years before she could shape it with a voice truly her own. As Isabella approached her teenage years, the question of marriage became a matter of national urgency. The stability of the monarchy, the preservation of alliances, and the future of the Spanish crown all hinged on the young queen's choice of husband. Yet in a court riddled with foreign influence and domestic scheming, her personal wishes carried little weight. By 1846, the pressure intensified. France and the British Empire had their own interests at stake, each pushing for a candidate that would tilt Spain toward their sphere of influence. Ultimately, the decision was made in haste and under duress. On the 10th of October in the year 1846, her 16th birthday, Isabella married her double first cousin, Francis of Assisi, Duke of Cadiz. The union was immediately controversial. Francis was known for his delicate health, reserved nature, and rumored lack of interest in women. Whispers about his suitability spread quickly through the court and beyond. The marriage, designed to calm political rivalries, instead fueled gossip and dissatisfaction. Within days, observers noted the cool distance between the couple. For Isabella, the marriage felt more like a performance than a partnership. Her role as queen consort to her own husband was weighed down by expectation and frustration. Despite the grandeur of the wedding ceremonies, there was little emotional connection and even less hope for a harmonious future. Still, the alliance served its purpose on paper. A queen had married, and the line of succession was theoretically secured. But beneath the surface, the strains of this political union would ripple through Isabella's personal life and public reign for decades to come. Behind the marble columns and gilded tapestries of the Spanish royal court, Queen Isabella's marriage unraveled in silence and scandal. Though she and Francis of Assisi maintained the appearance of unity in public, their private life was marked by distance, disappointment, and disillusion. With little affection and even less compatibility, both partners retreated into separate worlds that soon gave rise to whispers and shadows. Isabella, still young and emotionally isolated, found companionship outside her royal marriage. Rumors of romantic liaisons began to swirl with military officers, noblemen, and even courtiers. Whether whispered or true, these stories gained traction in both the palace and the press. The birth of her children, including future King Alfonso XII, only intensified speculation. Debates over legitimacy lingered in court corridors, casting a cloud over the succession. Meanwhile, Francis of Assisi, removed from matters of governance, built his own quiet circle within the palace, often separate from his wife and the politics of the day. His passive demeanor did little to endear him to the Spanish public, and many viewed him as a sidelined figure, ill-suited to the weight of royal expectations. Together yet apart, Isabella and Francis presided over a divided court. Factions formed around their private lives, feeding into broader political tensions. Gossip and rivalry flourished in this environment of mistrust. While Isabella still held the throne, her palace had become a battleground of glances, secrets, and soft betrayals. A kingdom within a kingdom, ruled not by law but by reputation and rumor. As Isabella matured into her role, the political ground beneath her throne grew ever more unstable. Her reign, meant to unify a divided Spain, became synonymous with intrigue, favoritism, and a widening chasm between the monarchy and its people. The queen, surrounded by shifting advisors and court favorites, often placed trust in those who served their own ambitions more than the good of the nation. The result was a court riddled with corruption. Scandals emerged around royal appointments, military leadership, and the use of public funds. Powerful generals and political strongmen rose and fell like waves, each promising reform but delivering deeper unrest. Prime ministers came and went with dizzying frequency, often lasting only months. Rather than offering stability, Isabella's court became a symbol of chaos. Meanwhile, revolts erupted in various provinces. Discontent simmered among liberals and republicans, who saw the monarchy as outdated and self-serving. Even moderate conservatives began questioning the Queen's ability to rule effectively. The press, emboldened by growing public frustration, no longer hesitated to criticize the crown. Satirical prints and political pamphlets painted Isabella as a monarch more concerned with court gossip than governance. Faced with mounting criticism, Isabella became increasingly isolated. She leaned more heavily on personal advisors and religious confidants, retreating from public engagement. The grandeur of her court masked a crisis of confidence and control. While she remained on the throne, it was now under siege, not by invading armies, but by the erosion of trust from within her own kingdom. Religion had always been a central force in Isabella's life, both personally and politically. As a devout Catholic, she leaned heavily on the church for guidance, surrounding herself with confessors and clerics who often held influence beyond spiritual matters. But in the broader political landscape of 19th century Spain, religion was no longer a unifying force. It had become a battleground. The Queen's open favoritism toward ultra-conservative Catholic factions alienated many moderates and liberals. Her support for restoring church privileges, including the return of confiscated lands and influence over education, was seen by reformers as a regression. This growing alliance between the crown and reactionary forces alarmed those who had once backed her ascent to power. The Spanish Parliament, or courts, found itself increasingly at odds with the monarch it had once defended. Conflicts erupted over constitutional reforms, civil liberties, and state control of religious institutions. Each confrontation further eroded Isabella's political base. While she saw herself as the guardian of Spain's moral fabric, many saw her as a monarch clinging to outdated traditions in a rapidly changing world. Outside the palace, the impact was palpable. Urban uprisings flared in Madrid and Barcelona, fueled by economic hardship and political suppression. In the countryside, radical pamphlets called for a republic. Isabella's court responded with censorship and repression, but these actions only deepened public resentment. By mid-reign, Isabella was trapped in a paradox, a queen devoted to faith and tradition, yet increasingly divorced from the nation's evolving identity. The more she resisted reform, the more her enemies multiplied in Parliament, in the press, and in the streets. As the 1850s unfolded, Queen Isabella's alliance with the moderate political faction began to crumble. The moderates, once her primary support base, had grown weary of her erratic appointments, shifting allegiances and inability to provide consistent leadership. With every crisis, the cracks widened, until eventually they could no longer be hidden behind ceremony and court etiquette. The fall began with mounting dissatisfaction among military leaders and regional governors. Many had been loyal to Isabella during the earlier Carlist struggles, but now questioned her judgment. Economic instability and widespread discontent only deepened their concerns. Corruption within the civil administration became a lightning rod for critics, and the Queen's refusal to embrace broader reforms made her increasingly vulnerable. In 1854, the situation erupted. A coalition of disgruntled generals, liberal politicians, and frustrated citizens launched what became known as the Vicalvarada uprising. Though initially a military revolt, it quickly morphed into a broader call for political change. The uprising forced Isabella to dismiss her moderate ministers and accept the return of the Progressive Party, her former rivals. This sudden shift in political power left the monarchy unmoored. The Queen found herself relying on politicians she did not trust, navigating ideologies she had long resisted. With every new cabinet, the crown seemed less stable, no longer a pillar of continuity, but a chess piece in an increasingly volatile game. The fall of the moderates marked a turning point in Isabella's reign. It revealed the fragility of her support and signaled that the days of passive loyalty were over. Spain had entered a new political era, one where monarchs could no longer govern without consequence. By the late 1850s and early 60s, unrest had become a constant undercurrent in Isabella's Spain. The monarch's erratic leadership, the court's deepening corruption, and ongoing religious tensions had alienated nearly every political faction. Across cities and provinces, frustration gave way to action as the people began to demand something more than promises and palace decrees. Public discontent manifested in waves of protests, newspaper editorials, and whispered conversations in cafes and salons. Intellectuals, students, and workers alike questioned not only the monarchy's decisions, but its very legitimacy. The failure of constitutional reforms and the rapid turnover of ministries had exhausted any remaining confidence in the Queen's capacity to rule. Meanwhile, former military officers and disillusioned politicians quietly began to build alliances. The Progressive Party, previously forced into the political shadows, regained strength. Urban centers like Madrid, Seville, and Barcelona became hotbeds of dissent, with angry crowds voicing their desire for justice, representation, and change. Isabella, increasingly isolated within her palace, underestimated the momentum growing outside its gates. Her attempts to reassert control through censorship, arrests, and government reshuffles only deepened the crisis. Spain was no longer simply dissatisfied, it was preparing for rupture. The revolution in the air was no longer a rumor. It was a wind picking up strength, blowing through courtyards, courtrooms, and cabinet halls. And though Isabella still wore the crown, the people's patience and the monarchy's time was beginning to run out. In the year 1868, the tension that had been simmering for years finally erupted into open revolution. Known to history as the Glorious Revolution, this dramatic uprising united liberals, progressives, and even conservative defectors in a single aim: to end the reign of Queen Isabella II. It was not merely a rebellion against a monarch, but against decades of political decay, favoritism, and royal detachment. The revolutionary wave began in Cadiz, where exiled generals like Juan Prim returned with force and purpose. Their rallying cry, "Down with the Bourbons!" swept through Spain like wildfire. Military garrisons defected, citizens marched, and the momentum grew with stunning speed. Key cities fell into revolutionary hands while government ministers abandoned their posts or fled outright. Within weeks, the revolutionaries approached Madrid. Isabella, watching her realm crumble, faced an impossible choice: resist and risk civil war or surrender the throne. With little support left and realizing the gravity of the moment, she chose exile. On a quiet day in September, she and her closest family members departed from San Sebastian, crossing into France. It was a departure marked not by ceremony, but by silence. There were no cheers, no farewells, only the sound of a monarchy quietly collapsing. The glorious revolution had succeeded where countless protests and petitions had failed. It had ended the reign of a queen not with bloodshed, but with resolve. Spain, for the first time in centuries, was without a monarch. And Isabella, once the center of its world, now stood on foreign soil, a queen without a crown. Exile took Queen Isabella II from the palaces of Madrid to the quiet boulevards of Paris. She settled in the French capital, living at the Palacio de Castilla, a grand residence that would serve as her court in exile. Though the building still shimmered with chandeliers and royal portraits, its purpose had changed. It was no longer the heart of a kingdom, but a place of reflection, retreat, and reinvention. In these early years of exile, Isabella maintained the rituals of monarchy. She held audiences, observed Catholic traditions, and kept close ties with royal relatives scattered across Europe. But behind the dignified exterior, there was loneliness and bitterness. The queen had lost her throne, her influence, and much of her country's love. She received occasional visitors, dignitaries, exiled Spaniards, and loyal monarchists. Yet the days felt long, the silence heavy. Her children, especially Alfonso, became her focus. She hoped to secure a future for them and perhaps one day a path back to Spain. Through letters and negotiations, she remained involved in political maneuvering even from afar. But the world had changed. Spain experimented with a short-lived republic, followed by a new monarchy under a foreign prince. Isabella, once the face of Spanish royalty, was now seen as a relic of a fading past. Still, she adapted. Though never fully welcomed in France, she learned to navigate Parisian society with grace and discretion. In exile, she gained something she had rarely known as queen perspective. And in that quiet distance from power, Isabella began to understand her legacy not as ruler, but as woman, mother, and survivor. By the early 1870s, Queen Isabella II had spent several years in exile. Though she still carried the title of queen in ceremonial settings, the political reality had moved on. Spain was restless, cycling through instability, and its people yearned for a new symbol of unity. Isabella, once the youngest monarch in Europe, was now a faded figure watching history unfold from the sidelines. It was in this moment of reflection that she made a defining decision to formally abdicate in favor of her son. On the 25th of June in the year 1870, Isabella signed the official declaration renouncing her rights to the Spanish crown. The act took place in her Paris residence, witnessed by close allies and foreign dignitaries. With the stroke of a pen, she placed her hopes and Spain's future in the hands of her young son, Alfonso. Though Alfonso was still a teenager, monarchists viewed him as a fresh start, untainted by the scandals and failures of his mother's reign. Isabella, for her part, believed in his potential. Her abdication was not just political, it was deeply maternal. She knew her time had passed. It was now up to the next generation to restore dignity to the monarchy or to lose it forever. In the privacy of her chambers, Isabella reportedly wept after signing the papers. It was the final letting go of power, of pride, of a crown that had weighed heavy since childhood. Yet in that surrender, she regained something priceless, the freedom to live as herself, not as a symbol. And for the first time, she began to feel at peace. After her abdication in 1870, Isabella II gradually re-entered society, not as a reigning monarch, but as a matriarch of Spain's royal lineage. Living in Paris offered both refuge and opportunity. Removed from the burdens of governance, she found space to focus on family ties, political influence through diplomacy, and her evolving role as a royal exile. Though no longer queen, Isabella retained her stature within Europe's royal circles. She attended private gatherings with French nobility, exchanged letters with monarchs across the continent, and quietly championed her son's political rise. Her residence became a hub for Spanish monarchists and foreign dignitaries alike, a discreet court in exile that pulsed with news, alliances, and strategy. Her relationship with her children, particularly Alfonso, remained central. As he prepared for his own claim to the Spanish throne, Isabella offered advice drawn from hard-earned experience. She remained proud, but also cautious, acutely aware of the traps that had ended her own reign. When Alfonso was eventually invited to return to Spain and crowned as King Alfonso XII in 1874, Isabella rejoiced privately. Though she was absent from the ceremony, it was a quiet triumph, her legacy, redeemed through her son. Beyond politics, Isabella also focused on her daughters' marriages, grandchildren's futures, and maintaining the Bourbon family's reputation. Paris, once her place of exile, had become a sphere of quiet power and family restoration. While the world saw a queen in retreat, Isabella had begun to master the subtle art of influence from behind the scenes. Long after her departure from power, Queen Isabella II's legacy remained a subject of fierce debate. For some, she was a tragic figure, a young girl thrust onto the throne amid chaos, forced to navigate a world of intrigue, betrayal, and relentless scrutiny. For others, she embodied the failures of 19th-century Spanish monarchy, scandal-ridden, politically unstable, and painfully out of touch. Historians have never reached consensus. Some defend her decisions as those of a monarch constrained by circumstance, manipulated by advisors, and surrounded by opportunists. They point to the early liberal reforms of her reign, her resilience during exile, and her maternal efforts to restore the monarchy through Alfonso. These sympathizers argue that her legacy deserves reconsideration, not as a tyrant, but as a survivor. Yet many critiques remain sharp. Her personal life, filled with rumors of affairs, favoritism, and lavish spending, was frequently used as ammunition by Republicans and reformers. Political opponents accused her of weakening the Spanish state through indecision and favoritism, helping to ignite the revolutionary tide that eventually swept her away. In literature and public memory, Isabella's image fractured into conflicting portraits: the devout Catholic queen, the scandalous woman, the puppet ruler, the exiled mother. No single version prevailed. Her likeness adorned churches and caricatures alike, revered in some corners and reviled in others. Even within Spain's royal history, Isabella's position remains ambiguous. Unlike monarchs who ruled with clear purpose or died in dramatic martyrdom, she existed in between, marked not by glory or ruin, but by complexity. And it is that very complexity that has made her story endure. Her name does not inspire universal admiration, but it does provoke thought about duty, power, womanhood, and the uneasy price of the crown. In every judgment passed upon her, a deeper question remains: what would any of us have done had we been in her place? As the 19th century gave way to the 20th, Queen Isabella II remained a figure both remembered and forgotten, present in royal correspondence and ceremonial titles, yet distant from the land she once ruled. Her final years were spent largely in quiet seclusion, surrounded by close family, trusted servants, and the soft rhythms of a life no longer shaped by politics or public pressure. She remained in Paris until the end, residing at the Palacio de Castilla, the same residence that had served as her court in exile for decades. Here, she lived simply but with dignity, hosting occasional visitors and maintaining a modest presence in European royal circles. Though her health declined steadily in her final years, Isabella was lucid and reflective, reportedly dictating letters and revisiting mementos from her early reign. On the 9th of April in the year 1904, Isabella II passed away peacefully at the age of 73. There was no public spectacle, only private mourning. but her death, when announced, stirred echoes across Spain and the royal houses of Europe. Tributes arrived from monarchs, former allies, and even political rivals. Despite the controversies of her reign, there was respect for the endurance of her spirit and the historical weight she carried. Her body was returned to Spain for burial, a symbolic act of reconciliation between a monarch and her nation. Isabella was interred in the royal monastery of El Escorial, the traditional resting place of Spanish kings and queens. The ceremony, though subdued, marked her quiet re-entry into the royal narrative she once defined. And so ended the life of Spain's first reigning queen since the 16th century, a woman who had ruled young, fallen hard, and endured long. Her legacy may remain contested, but her story is unforgettable. For in the corridors of power and exile alike, Isabella II left behind a haunting and human question: was she a failed queen, or simply a woman born into an impossible crown? What do you think about Maria Christina of the Two Sicilies? Was she a brave and devoted queen mother, rising from widowhood to regency, guarding a fragile throne through war, scandal, and impossible pressures? Or was she a shadowed figure, entangled in secrecy and politics, remembered more for intrigue than for her courage or sacrifice? And what about Queen Isabella II? Was she a monarch born too soon, a woman of spirit who tried to lead amidst rebellion, betrayal, and relentless scrutiny? Or was she a tragic heir cast into power before understanding it, her story marked more by controversy than by clarity or choice? Were these women quiet architects of Spain's royal survival, or symbols of a monarchy in slow decline? Did their choices echo through history, or were they simply swept away by its tides? We would love to hear your thoughts. Let us know in the comments below. And if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more powerful tales from the past, stories of courage, choice, and the quiet force behind history. Thank you so much for watching.